I tricked over 120,000 people on Twitter who believe that my fake Rui5 card is real.
Nobody likes long intros, so I made a card in the Project SEKAI art style. I will explain how timestamps are available.
The first thing I did was to decide on a concept. I came up with a rough idea of video game, digital space, and platformer game. What I recommend doing is write down a bunch of keywords related to the idea you had.
Cyberspace, dynamic, perspective goes way over there. For short things, pixels, video game interface, low-key need alien classes because why not? Jumping Matron, electricity, straight ray, I don't know, something cool. Right?
Step 2. Spend over 7 hours designing an outfit. I am stupid and forgot to use Project SEKAI's costumes as a reference. Don't do that. Step 3. Rough sketch. You can start however you want, but since Project SEKAI's cards focus on the character, I think it's better to think about the pose first. What I like to do is draw stick men or potato men or a mix of the two men. I was completely out of ideas, so I just copied posts I found on Pinterest, but none of them really stuck to me. So I tried to rank them depending on how good they would look in a composition, but I got lazy and gave up. I finally found a pose that I liked and drew a rough composition, but I thought, I want to make it so that we can see Rui jump up from a platform. So I erased the whole composition and made another one with a different angle. This is the composition that stuck for the next 40 hours. I wanted it to show that Rui is jumping to the next stage above some buildings, so this shows that he can still do better as a show director, since my speculations for the story of Rui5 would be a focus on his growth as director, but that he also has already come very far since he was a child. This is a lie. I didn't put that much thought into the composition, but it works anyway. Because I am stupid, I decided to draw the background using fisheye perspective, something I've never done before on top of drawing in a completely different style from what I'm used to. For the background, I used different shades of grey to try and express some depth, even in the sketch, because just it helps me. I wanted a very dynamic pose because I have no reason. I'm just stupid. Then I roughly drew the anatomy. Don't pay too much attention to it, I never studied anatomy, I suck. Step 4. Actual sketch. Less ugly. After deciding to draw something well above my current skill level, I started properly sketching. To achieve a believable face, I tried to chase it by making a 3D model who would match the face proportions of the Project SEKAI art style, but it turned out to be this whole project's most terrifying moment. What the f is that? Sorry, this is gonna stay on the screen for a little while. I would like to apologize to Rui for this personal attack. I headcanon him as ugly, but not that ugly. Anyway, I started using proper references. I recommend tracing the shape of the face on as many different cards you can find that match the angle of the face you would like to achieve. Also, beware of the anatomy type you want to copy. Rui and Emu obviously have very different anatomy, so you should only use Rui, Tsukasa, Akito, Toya, and Kaito cards as a reference if you want to draw Rui. I am not including Len in this because his head type is different. Please also take a good look at the facial features of the character you're going to draw. In some cards, Rui has 2 small bottom eyelashes, which you might completely miss if you do not properly look at the character you want to draw. Make sure to study them first, and by that I mean staring at them creepily until you appear in their nightmares. While I yapped, past me already finished the face sketch. It could be better, but I fixed it later on, so it's fine. This time, I didn't study the Project SEKAI art style's anatomy at all. Because of the crazy foreshortening in the pose, this isn't very noticeable, but if you draw something more static, you'll need to be a lot more careful about proportions and the shape of the body. Since Rui5 was supposedly a limited gacha event, I decided to give him a new hairstyle, so I didn't need to study his original hairstyle. I used a few references to draw the clothes, but not too many. My friend's style helped me a lot with the shirt. Showing your works in progress to your friends can help correct mistakes, so if possible, please do get some feedback. I like to color my sketches because it gives me a neat preview of how the card should look once finished. This helps with correcting the composition so colors do not clash together. Here I did not need to correct much, but it might happen in the future, so please pay attention to this as well. Step 5. Line art. I completely forgot about line weight when doing line art, so we'll come back to it just after doing the base coloring. Please refer to it. Unfortunately, my recording software crashed in the middle of drawing, so I lost the footage of me redrawing the face, but as you can see, as I began to draw the line art for the face, I realized that the sketch was super ugly and didn't make much sense. I just completely forgot the deck. So, I corrected the sketch and redrew the face accordingly. I really advise that you pay special attention to the face when you try to imitate the Project SEKAI art style. Redraw the sketch 4 times like me if needed until you get it right. Otherwise, no matter how pretty your background is or how accurately you can draw the body, if your face doesn't look like something you'd see in Project SEKAI, it will not look like Project SEKAI at all. It will surely be wonderful art, but not a fake Project SEKAI card. I also had to correct the hair. The braid didn't look natural to me, so I used Minori's braid as a reference to draw a better sketch and then draw the line art over it. I advise you keep a single canvas with all the references you've used for your drawing so you can go back to them later if needed. As you can see, I am trying to cheese drawing again. This time, it works. If you're using Clip Studio Paint or Ibis Paint, you should have access to vector layers. They allow you to correct the lines you have drawn without having to redraw them 100 times until you get the perfect stroke. If you're interested, I recommend checking out vector layers and vector erasers. They can help save a lot of time. I also noticed that the Project SEKAI art style tends to focus on shading a little bit more than line art, which is why I'm trying to limit the lines and the hair as much as possible so I can actually shade them instead of drawing them with a hard line right now. Drawing the clothes was pretty straightforward. The Project SEKAI artists don't really draw folds or any complicated fabric bending at the lineart stage, so I left it rather blank this time. When drawing clothing folds, consider the material. If it's a cotton t-shirt, there will be more folds than on a thick synthetic jacket. I like to keep every element in a separate layer, even at the lineart stage. It makes coloring the lineart easier later on. I do not want to count how many layers I ended up with, considering that I never merge any layers together. By the way, if you haven't heard about layer masks, I recommend you check them out. I'm not sure if they're available on Ibis Paint, but Clip Studio Paint makes them really easy to use. They allow you to erase without erasing. What I mean by that is that you can erase a part of your drawing, like overlapping line art, on the layer mask. When the mask is on, the lines are erased. When you turn off the mask, the lines are back. This is really useful for corrections, so you will see me use them a lot. Also, you may have noticed already that I have a folder named Discard. I use it to stuff all the layers, the parts I don't need in the final drawing, but that I do not want to delete. I don't actually think I've deleted a single layer in this whole project, and instead I stuffed it all in the discard folder. Step 6. Base colors. Again, it seems that part of the recording is missing. I'm sorry, I don't have much to say about the process except that keeping everything on a separate layer makes it much easier for the shading. I used the multiply layer to color the glasses so it would be see-through. Aside from the glasses, I tried to keep as many layers as possible on normal blending mode even during the shading stage. I also recommend that you actually name your layers. Please do name your layers. I also like to have a gray background when doing base coloring so I can see when I missed a few pixels in the corner of the line art, even if the color is light. I forgot some details while doing the line art, so I added them and then edited some lines I didn't like. At that point, I realized I hadn't actually checked how thick my line art should be. Don't do that, please adjust your line weight during the line art stage. I compared it with a card that uses foreshortening since lines that are closer to the viewer will be thicker. I noticed the Project SEKAI art style's line art was 4 pixels thick on average, but since my canvas is twice as big as a regular card, I should have made my line art 8 pixels thick on average. I didn't like it, so I kept it at a range of 2 to 8 pixels thick. I don't think anybody noticed the difference in thickness, but I will most definitely study the Project SEKAI line arts in the future. Step 6.5. Pretend you have enough motivation to draw the background. Actually, most of my drawings have a background and not just a character on a white background, but it doesn't mean I really enjoy drawing backgrounds. It's fun, but it's so hard and it's kind of boring sometimes. So when I grew bored, I decided to shade Rui instead. Maybe I'm spoiling the video, but this will all be erased in just a few minutes. Step 7. Lighting. So, I am realizing now that the beginning of each step seems to be cut for some reason, which is weird because I always did a test recording before recording my process after noticing the problem the first time. Once again, I'm sorry. If you have any questions, please do feel free to ask them in the comments or by email. I did the lighting before the shading because areas in the lights do not need any more details, especially in the very bright and harsh kind of light I am painting. The details should be kept in the shadows. But before that, I added a multiply layer filled with colors I picked from the background to make Rui blend in more with his environment. Because the arm is overlapping with the body, I wanted to highlight it using the magenta lighting. This was very difficult. By the way, the lighting also applies to the line art. I simply made a lighting folder limited by a layer mask so the lighting wouldn't touch the background. If you're using Clip Studio Paint, you should set your folder to through mode. I wanted to make a shadow on Rui's leg because his hand would block some of the lights, but it turns out that I suck at envisioning things in 3D, so I had to use a 3D model to help me. I noticed that the Project SEKAI art style has a range of different ways to render characters. Most of the time they use cel shading, so I made the edges of the lighting clear and hard. I didn't use the blur tool a lot, but I did use a very soft eraser to create gradients. I added the second light source just as harsh as the first one. I didn't give no reason, I just thought it would look cool with more cyan. I made the light come from behind, which is why only the edges are faded. I added the third light source. The yellow light would come from the platforms under Rui, so I focused most of my efforts on the legs and the shoes. I also added a little bit on his face so it attracts more attention. Step 8. Shading. I shaded Rui using colors I could pick on one of his 2 source cards. That way I could get a neutral shade before adjusting it with color settings if needed, though that only happened with the hair, which I found wasn't saturated enough. I found it essential to always have a bunch of references next to you when shading each individual part. I actually have a very different way of shading compared to the Project SEKAI art style, so I had to gather a lot of references to make sure it would look close enough to the real cards. I really like the way the Project SEKAI artists have been shading the eyes lately, so I used recent cards as references. This is also something I recommend you be mindful of because the old Project SEKAI cards do not really have the same style as the newer ones. So let's say you want to make a fake Nene card for the Becoming Potatoes event, please do make sure your references uses the old cards and not the new ones, otherwise it will look completely out of place. I really like the glowy blur behind the eyes highlights as well, so I added it. Shading the hair was hard. My style is very different and much softer, so I had a lot of trouble. I had to rely heavily on my reference canvas to make it look somewhat accurate, and even then I had to rework the hair almost entirely at the end after finishing the background. So what you're seeing me draw right now will be all scrapped in just a few minutes. I really like Saki's hair and her wording on train card, so I wanted to copy it, but as time was running out with Rui's birthday approaching, I had to cut corners, which made the hair look very different from the Project SEKAI art style. I also had trouble shading the shirt at first. If this happens to you, here's what you can do to solve it. Focus on the bigger shape. Forget tiny details and shadows goes by default. Just color a big shape of shading and erase or art the details as you go. I don't have much to say about the shading process. I usually consider 3 zones: the light, the middle tone, and the shadow. Because the Project SEKAI art style uses mostly cel shading, the edges of each zone is hard and doesn't require a lot of further work. However, it does happen that some edges are softened by either a blur or a gradient. I probably overuse those two things because I am more comfortable using them than cel shading, but I exercised some restraint and did not use any soft brushes. The only 2 ways I used to soften the edges were a blur tool and an eraser. I recommend keeping each shading color on a separate layer or a canvas so you can color pick them later on for a more consistent shading. I don't think the Project SEKAI artists shade materials, types of fabric very differently, so I use the same technique the whole time. If you have to shade gradients, I recommend shading the element with a multiply layer using a very light blue. After that, you can color the blue shading with soft brushes to follow the gradients. I try to stay mindful of what should be in the light, what should be in the shadows when shading each individual part, but I admittedly haven't really studied the art fundamentals that much, so if possible, please do give a try to the art fundamentals first. Step 9. Coloring the line art. I just color picked the line art from Project SEKAI cards and called it a day. I hate coloring the line art, it's boring. Step 10. Stop pretending the background doesn't exist. I cannot escape it. You cannot escape it, I cannot escape it. First, I drew the platforms using my perspective ruler. Next, I changed my perspective ruler. This means I cannot trace over my sketch anymore. I actually have to redraw the whole new sketch. If anyone is curious, that was 2 days before Rui's birthday. I don't know why I did that when I had such a short deadline, but I did it anyway, so please have fun watching me suffer. For a while, I got sick of drawing cubes again and again, so I drew a sky instead. It will be changed later on. By the way, when drawing light sources and light in the background, I find it much easier to use layered modes such as add blow, blur dodge, blow dodge, and hard light. To make the sun look like it's glowing, I simply duplicated my layer, but it's under the original layer, and then blurred it until it looks like something cool. Lol. Then I drew more cubes. I tried to stay mindful of the overall composition. Ideally, elements in a drawing should guide the viewer's eyes and trap them in an infinite loop in the drawing. So I tried to use the bright yellow platforms as a way to guide the viewer's eyes around Rui to really make him feel like the center of the piece. I also wanted to give a sense of depth in the drawing by making some platforms smaller and more blue so they look like they're far away. The background in most Project SEKAI cards also have a line art, so I also drew it. However, I deleted it later on because I thought it looked cooler without it. Probably because I'm used to drawing the background without any line art. My recording crashed again, so you can't see me doing this, but I actually redrew a new sketch for the buildings in the background. I wasn't satisfied with the sky, so I redrew it. I referenced Leonid's many Starry Skies cameos in their parts. I also added the Milky Way because it's cute. Then I drew more blocks. It was very long and very boring. Please make fun of my suffering so I can feel like it had a purpose. When drawing backgrounds, I think diversity is really important, especially if you're drawing a city. My idea was some kind of cyberpunk city because it's supposed to be a video game kind of set in the future or something. So I tried to keep everything as blocky, as square as possible, but I also tried to give it more diversity by making some towers, some low buildings. Just try to keep it like diverse. I shaded the blocks very simply and without details. I also used atmospheric perspective to make the buildings at the far back blend with the background to make them look farther away. The middle of the plaza looked very empty, so I desperately tried to fill the gap with anything. I found a brush to make quick windows on all the buildings, so I used it and adjusted the shape to the perspective of each building. After that, I drew the final adjustments. My friend Stella pointed out that the glasses looked too flat, so I tried to adjust the lighting to make the glass look incurved. I also used multiply layers to give the shading more depth, though I was careful because too much shading would ruin the focal point of the illustration, which is the eyes. Then I added some sort of user interface as a frame. Please note that this kind of thing would not be used in a Project SEKAI card due to the need for the card to look good on many different kinds of screen. If a phone model has a thinner screen, then the edges of the card would be cut when viewing the card in full screen mode in the game. That means that the frame will look unnaturally cut here, so that is one of the many indications that this card was not designed to actually be in the game. Since this card was meant to be for Rui's birthday, I wanted to include his birthday and Wandasho's birthday in the card somehow. So I used HP bars and XP points as an excuse to have a Wandasho birthday cameo. Finally, I added effects to make the colors more vibrant. And I added triangle particles because I don't know, I've always had an obsession with adding particles floating around my drawings. I finally redrew the hair. I tried to make the shading harsher because I didn't like the soft look from before. I also added a pinkish hue on the bangs to try and express more transparency.
By the way, when you're drawing, please remember to drink and stretch once in a while, and also to eat and take a shower or do anything you need to do to stay healthy. Please take care of yourself.
This video is not meant as a tutorial, but as a commentary. However, if you would like me to do a full tutorial, please do let me know in the comments. Also, if you would like to attempt to study the Project SEKAI art style, I often share some thoughts about my struggles on Twitter, so please do have a look. You can also tag me, shoot me a DM, or contact me by email. I am slow to reply, but I will get back to you. I didn't like the colors of the platforms anymore, but changing them removed the playful element I was going for, so I ended up keeping them yellow, though that is not the best decision I've ever made. It looks muddy and out of place, but you know what, I accept it. I'll do better next time.